Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the fourth episode of Torah Visuals podcast. We've gone through a whole journey. The Alter Rebbe is building a picture for us here. He's taking it step by step by step. And now at step 4, there's a lot of really cool things we're going to discuss. But before we get into that, I first wanted to address 2 questions we were asked on our comments, from whether it came from Chabad.org or it came on our YouTube channel. We got comments. And guys, if you have any questions, any comments, please put it out there. We went back to our WhatsApp groups and all of our team. They're from all over the world, so we're connected on WhatsApp and Zoom. And we discussed the questions, and we said, who has any answers, or go to a rabbi friend. Like, we take it very seriously, because besides for the fact that we like engagement, and that's the 21st century, and that's how you build and whatever, but besides for that, we want this to be authentic and real and true. So if you ask a question and we don't have an answer ready at our fingertips, we're going to get to the bottom of it, because we need to make sure that we're being accurate and true to, as Rebbe Tzvi Freeman calls it, true to the fidelity of Chassidus. We want to make sure that we're actually telling you the right things. So one question came from Chaim, and Chaim asked, why did God have to go through so many Tzimtzumim? Why couldn't he, he's God, he's Kol Yachol, he could do whatever he wants. Why couldn't he just make the world as it is, ready to go? Why do you have to go through this process of so many Tzimtzumim? It's a great question. So first of all, being that God is the Kol Yachol, we say that God could do such a thing. And in a way he did, because it says that God had a thought, and from that thought, all of existence comes to be. So in that original thought, you do have everything. It's just then when God went and made it more Gashmi, when he made it more physical, so that's when the process happened. And that's a concept called Seif Maisa Machshava Tchila, that at the end of, when you look at the final result, and you look at a episode of Torah Visuals, you look at a final video, that video was in our imaginations 3 months ago. And I saw it clearly. I saw exactly how it would be, and maybe not every detail, and things evolve, whatever, but you had a thought. And then you go through all the work, 3 months, you got to record, you got to write, you got to edit, you got to go. And then at the end, that video, the Maisa, the final product, was in my thought. So that's Seif Maisa Machshava Tchila. So God has that. He has a thought. The entire world exists. Now he has to go and bring it out into practicality. So in a way, God does do what you're saying with just in one shot. You have the thought, it's all there. But then bringing it down to Gashmi, which is how we relate to things, he made it in this step-by-step progression. Okay, but I'm still saying that he went by that step-by-step progression. So we could look at what God did. We know that God did, it's such a weird concept to even say, but there was like a beta test on the world. First, he made what's called the world of Tohu, the world of chaos. And then he made the world of Tikkun, the world of order. In the world of chaos, he did less Tzimtzumim. He did, okay, here's my light, and yes, we're going to put a tzimtzum, we're going to put it in a keli, we're going to make a contraction, we're going to put it in the keli, in the vessel, but he didn't do as many tzimtzumim, he didn't do as many contractions, and it busted, which we alluded to in video 1. You see the keli, the vessel filling up, too much, bam, it blows out. So God tried, whatever that word even means, God trying, but God went through a beta version where he did less tzimtzumim and it blows out the power line. So we need these many tzimtzumim, and that's how it works on God's. Why does it work like that by God? This is beyond what we could cover, but we see that that's what happened. He made a first world that didn't have as many tzimtzumim, it blew out. Now in this world with more tzimtzumim, it works. So what were the more steps in place that God put into place? What were those more tzimtzumim? That it's also coming in the next episodes. We're going to talk about hiskalalus. Spoiler for the next episodes. Hiskalalus means like an interconnection, where I take things that seem separate and I synthesize them and get them in a fusion together. So that's a major tzimtzum, because in the world of Taihu, in the world of chaos, what God did was, okay, here's chesed, this is kindness. Kindness is going to come in. When we're being kind, we're being kind. And then you have Gvura, when we're being strict or forceful, we are being forceful. That is it. There's no nuance. And the world couldn't work that way. The world needs nuance. So in Tikkun, In the world of Tikkun, God does hiskalus, and that is a form of contraction that they work together. They need to come together and become one thing. So that was a great question from Chaim. Why did God need to throw so many tzimtzumim? So first of all, we just see from how he did it practically. When he did the world of Tayu without tzimtzumim, it busted. With tzimtzumim, it works. What were those tzimtzumim? The hiskalus, the blending. Also, God wanted to make a world where we interact, and that we interact with, I am one thing, my computer is another thing. And the level of complexity that goes into making a computer or making a human brain is just different. And these differences are how much effort, how much energy, how much contraction, how much power goes into a thing. And if you're going to have differentiation, all that means contraction. If God was just one light, then you wouldn't have a difference between me and a computer. These things wouldn't be. There would be non-differentiated light. In order to have differentiated, specific light, this is a computer, this is a mic, this is me, you need contraction for it to become different things. But a great question, Chaim, thank you. Another question we fielded from Nathan from Australia. This was very interesting. He says, we're saying that God's words build creation, right? That's what it says. God worked for 6 days. What did he work? What was he doing? What was the work that God was doing? He was speaking. He was speaking, saying, let there be light, let there be man, let there be animals. These words build creation. That's work. On the seventh day, he rested. But the Alter Rebbe is saying, and he got it from the Baal Shem Tov, and it comes from the rabbis, that God is constantly speaking. If God stops for a second, then this whole thing disappears, as if it never was. So God is constantly speaking. Even on Shabbos, we just said that the work he did on the 6 days was speaking. How does that work? If God's speaking on Shabbos, is he not breaking Shabbos? How does that work? So great question. And we had a whole discussion, and this was the one that really blew up our WhatsApp group. And somebody shared a video from Rabbi Bittul. I hope to put a link in the description. Rabbi Bittul has a platform, maybe it's a podcast. He has a platform called Stump the Rabbi or Ask the Rabbi. And somebody asked this question. And the response was essentially that Shabbos, the whole world elevates to the level of thought. Shabbos is more pure, more on a higher level, and thought is a more elevated level than speech. It goes from you have a thought, then you articulate it as speech, then you go to action, is more physical in this world. So those are going from a more fine, almost spiritual version of physicality is a thought. It's definitely physical, but it's semi-ethereal. And on Shabbos, we all raise up to that level of thought. So God is not quite speaking us. We are one with him, and that's what it talks about, Raza de Shabbos, in a lot of people's nusach when they daven Friday night. It talks about the oneness. There's a certain mystery of the oneness of Shabbos, and part of why we become so close and one with God is because we go from speech, which speech is conveying from me to you. I have a thought inside of me. I use my speech to go outward. So speech is separation. Thought is in me. It's one. So we all elevate to a level of thought, so we become one with God. So that is very interesting because it's okay. I hear what you're saying. That's a good idea that we're from thought, but doesn't it say that you need the words? God needs to speak in order to create? Isn't creation like it looks like this otherness because God is speaking? How does that work? And this is amazing because something I think the whole world needs to be building towards, a godly concept that we're trying to portray, is paradox. Paradox is not, I see a contradiction. You said this, you said this. You obviously can't be telling the truth because your words are contradicting. Paradox is telling you that a real truth has an equal and opposite truth, and you have to be comfortable with that. And what does that mean? I'm not just trying to get away with this answer, you know? It sounds like, you can't answer it, so you say, no, I'm saying that God wants us to be comfortable with paradox because what he wants is for us to exist as a separate entity, but then to become one with him. So you have to become separate, and then you have to become one. But if I become one, am I separate? Both. You need to be both. You need to be this paradox. So are we thought? Are we speech? The answer on some level is both. Because on some level you are thought and you go up and you become one with God. But on some level we are here. It is physical. It is spoken. So the paradox has to exist. And I think the world is getting closer to understanding this by things like quantum. Quantum, back in the day, before we discovered quantum, we figured this is this, that is that. If either it's a piece of metal, it's a piece of wood, it can't be both. When we looked at quantum, light is now considered, if you look at it at the quantum level, it is both a wave, light travels in wavelengths, and it is also a photon. So it's a wave, has less physical, it's just a wave of energy, and the photon has like physical mamashas to it, has physicality to it, to the point like you could shoot photons. That's how lasers work. I shoot photons and it could drill into wood, metal, whatever. So it is both at the quantum level. That doesn't make sense. Choose one. It's funny because the Schrodinger's cat is a famous way of explaining quantum, that you put a cat in a box and there's a poison in there that is it's a nuclear element that degrades, and if it degrades, then the cat will be poisoned and die. So while the cat is in the box and the element is in there and you don't know if it degraded yet or not, it takes time, so you don't know if it degraded. Is the cat alive or dead? The answer, according to, and this is not true because quantum, we're talking about at the micro level, this doesn't work on cats, but just as a thought experiment, he's saying, what is the status of that cat? It is alive and dead, both. And Schrodinger, the guy who came up with this example, he wasn't saying it to explain quantum. He was saying it to disprove it. He's like, what, you're going to tell me if I put a cat in the box and it has the poison, it's both alive and dead? That's preposterous. And everybody was like, yeah, no, that's it. Yeah, you just gave a great mushal for what quantum is. So I just find that hilarious. So the world, my point with bringing this up is that the world is getting comfortable with the concept of paradox. We're seeing it al-pi science, that paradox is real. And that's what God is trying to prepare us for. Because when we have Moshiach, we will have God, infinite God, revealed down here. And that's an oxymoron in terms. Because if infinite God is revealed, then there is no down here. But we want to achieve that paradox. God wants, when Moshiach comes, for him in all his infinite glory to be revealed to me and you as individuals who are differentiated from his light, but are also going to be one with him and chilling. And that is a paradox. But we are looking to achieve paradox. So great question from Nathan from Australia. He was asking, if everything comes from God's words and that is work, so how does he speak us on Shabbos? The answer is that we go to the level of thought. We become one with God because we are not necessarily being spoken, but we are also being spoken because this world still exists on Shabbos, but in a higher state. Paradox. L'chaim v'levracha. Okay, now that we did the questions, and please, again, if you have any questions on what we just said, on what we're going to say on the previous videos, please reach out. We will address it. And now to get into episode 4. So the Alter Rebbe is building a picture, and it goes step by step. It started with the Baal Shem Tov said that, and he's quoting from David HaMelech, that your words, God, are always standing in the sky. And he interpreted that to mean that when you said the words Yehi Ar, that made light, but you are constantly speaking it. Those words constantly have to be there. So that's the premise we started with. The Alter Rebbe said, okay, if it's constantly coming from the energy from God's mouth, constantly, then that must mean that there is a level of hashgacha pratis, of divine intervention, where God is orchestrating all of reality. Because if God is actively energizing my hand right now to be in this exact position, and he's going to energize it when it's in this position, and he's also energizing my synapses in my mind that are telling my hand to go to that position, then he's not just energizing it, he's coordinating it. And he's coordinating how my voice is being reacted to by the mic. The mic has its, I don't know what's in there, but it's detecting the wavelengths coming out of my mouth. And as the vibrations hit it, so it's a godly interaction from my mouth that he's making, going it. So he's coordinating everything. So the premise was that God is actively energizing everything at all times, which means he's coordinating it, which now we come to episode 4, which means that we are bittul. Now, bittul is a big word. It's a big word. It's a big word. It's a 3-letter word, Alter. Yeah, it's a big word. And like I like to say over here, we don't translate these words because it's an idea. It's like, how would you translate quantum physics into Yiddish or Hebrew? Like, I could come up with a word, but you didn't convey the idea. So bittul, it means the word that I grew up with when we were in yeshiva, they always said nullified. It becomes nullified into God. I've been recently using the word dissolved. I like the word dissolved because the word nullified means null, it's not there, it's gone, which the Alter Rebbe stresses emphatically. But then he also says that you are real and you do exist. You're just bittul within the infinite godliness. So what does that mean? You are there, but you're bittul within it. So I use the word dissolve. If you ever take salt and you put it into water, it looks like it disappeared. And it's in solution in this whole thing. It's one with it. You can't find grains of salt, but it is there. It just made this whole thing salty now. So I like the word dissolved, but we're going to play with this idea. The Alter Rebbe is saying that if God is energizing everything right now, and he's orchestrating everything right now, he is everything, and you aren't. You are bittul. You are dissolved within this infinite light, and you aren't here. Here's an example. If I look at a mirror, right? And I'm in the mirror, and I see my reflection. Now, that reflection, does it exist at all on its own? No. If I leave, the reflection disappears. When I'm there, the reflection's there. So does the reflection have any of its own self-identity, selfness? Not at all. It's just a reflection of me. And if I'm not there, it's gone. So is it or is it not? So the answer is both. It is there, but it has none of its own selfness. So by us as well, we are here, but we're energized by God. He's coordinating our movements. He's interacting for us and with us. So if I'm so dependent on him for every aspect of me, then there isn't really a me. Think about a puppet. And this is an uncomfortable image for a lot of people to think that God is the hand inside of them, like the puppet, and it's speaking for you. And yeah, stay up at night contemplating this, let it bother you. And let's discuss it further. But God is actively in you, energizing you, making you, which means that you aren't. When I look at the hand with the puppet, do I think that that's am I talking to the puppet, or I'm talking to the human whose hand is in the puppet? And yes, there are great ventriloquists who know how to do this. Like, I remember watching a ventriloquist, and the guy is talking very polite, and then his puppet is being very rude. And I'm like, hello, puppet guy, you gotta stop that. And I'm looking at the guy who is the puppeteer, and I'm feeling almost embarrassed for him. I'm like, wow, I'm sorry that your puppet's acting out. Like, he's saying all this ridiculous stuff. And like, he fooled me. Then I caught myself. I'm like, oh my God, he is that, So that's what God is doing here. He's making this appear as if like the puppet's animated all by itself. We are here. I'm moving. This is me. I decided to do that. But really, it's God energizing everything, which means that I don't have an existence for myself, like the puppet, like the reflection. If you want to know about free will, we discussed that in last podcast. We'll put a link into it. Go check it out because it's a very fine line. But that's the idea that the Alter Rebbe is building here. Now, when it comes to bittul, that you don't exist because there's a bigger energy that just completely obliterates you, and you do still kind of exist, you're somewhere in there, but you're so inconsequential, and it's not even inconsequential. It's not just a size thing. It's also qualitatively, you are just the energy source. What's an example? The Alter Rebbe gives an example. He gives an example of the sun and a ray. And we show it in the video, and it's beautiful. Thank you to the artists who portray it so nicely. But we see the sun and the ray. Okay, a sun is this massive nuclear power plant that is crushing with all its pressure. It's making hydrogen into helium, and it's pushing it all together, and it's making these crazy things, and it's such intense energy. And it eventually sends out these light rays. And when a light ray comes down to me, It's the exact same photon and wavelength that was in the sun. If I put out my hand and there's a light ray on it, I am touching the sun. It's obviously not the sun. It's a ray. If I was touching the sun, I'd be burnt up in seconds. But it's the exact same molecule. It's the exact same mamashis. It's the exact same thing. So when I look inside the sun, I'm seeing those exact molecules. I'm not seeing individual rays. When you're in the source, you don't see individualness. You just see the source itself. You see the sun. If I was in the sun, I'd say I'm looking at the sun. I'm not looking at rays. If I'm in my room looking out my window and I see a beautiful day and I see a sunlight, I'm like, whoa, check out those rays. I know in my head that those rays are not something separate from the sun. The rays are the sun. But when they're out of the source, they could appear and you could think of them as being separate. Knowing that they are completely dependent on the sun for their existence, they are the sun. Then if you go up into the sun, there you don't see rays at all. So this is actually very, very subtle, because the Alter Rebbe never says this like specifically, but all of Chassidus since then has talked about this. There are two levels of bittel that you could achieve with your own mind. So what does this mean? What it means is, the Alter Rebbe says at the beginning, he says that why do I feel independent? How come I feel independent? And he says, because I cannot see my source. If I could see the source, then I would lose my independence. What does that mean? So the Alter Rebbe explains that there are two different levels of bittel. There's what's called bittel hayesh and bittel b'metzias. Bittel hayesh means that you lose the ego. You lose the, I am me. Why? Because you know that you are dependent on something else. Like if I look at the ray that is out of the sun, it has its own identity, sort of. Like I know it's a ray, but I also know that it's completely dependent on the sun. Same thing with the reflection, same thing with the puppet. The reflection, that's a mirror, that's a reflection. It has its own concept, but it's completely dependent on the person's face inside. It's completely dependent on the person to give it that substance. Same thing with the puppet. It is a puppet. It is something different. It's not you, but it's completely dependent on you for everything, for its movement, for its voice. So that is a level of bittel where you know it's completely dependent on its source, but it still appears like its own thing. And this we could achieve mentally. The Alter Rebbe said, you can't see it. I can't see the source code, but I can imagine it. If somebody sits there and imagines how God is everything and that he is your life force and he is energizing you, you can mentally get to a space where you realize that all you are is currents of godly energy. And you could dissolve your ego and just become one with the universe. That's what meditation does. That's what Chabad Chassidus is trying to achieve. Chabad Chassidus is trying to achieve that mentally I will think about God's greatness and how he is filling me and how he is everything that I am is all him, and that if I think about it long enough and deep enough and if it connects to my heart, I will disappear. That's bittel. Then there's a higher level. There's bittel b'metzias, the ray of light, not as I see it over here, but as it's in the sun. When it's in the sun, there is no ray. Yes, there is, the exact same molecules are there, and one day that will become a ray. So he's in there. He's not gone. It's there, but there's no concept of a ray. There's no concept and separateness. It's all just the sun. So if you mentally could think about how, there's me, and everything that I am is godly energy. So therefore, it's all just God and I don't exist. That's an amazing achievement. And then Chassidus goes even further and says, no. There isn't a you. There isn't a world. You're in the source. There's just pure, endless, godly endlessness. So that is the concept of bittul b'metzias. Now, I want us to not get too ahead of ourselves, because when I grew up in yeshiva, it was almost like demanded by the rabbis. They're like, why are you not bittul b'metzias? Why are you not like completely, you want pizza? that's such a physical kind of thing. Why aren't you more godly? And it was like, okay, back off. I'm just a guy. I'm just living this life. I'm just trying to enjoy myself. I'm just trying to understand a little bit. I'm trying to connect. So everybody calm down. Life is good. We just want you to think about this, to try to elevate your life a little bit, that there's more, and there's more, and there's more, and it goes on and on and on forever. So it's a really cool concept. Dive into Bittul, do some of the meditations, which we hope to get into one day. We're going to do some meditations for you to get us warmed up into this mindset. But basically, that's the idea that the Alter Rebbe is trying to go with in this episode. Now, the way we show it in the opening sequence, which I love the opening shot. It's so beautiful, the richness of color. Just shout out to the animators. It's mamish incredible. So what we're trying to portray here is that everything is interconnected. When you go out in nature, when somebody's hiking, if they're ever on a beach, if they're ever in a forest, wherever you are, you see there's a flow. Everything seems to be like, if I'm looking out at a forest, it looks like one picture. If I focus, I'll see that's a tree, that's a rock, that is mud, that is an animal. When I look at a city street, it doesn't seem as harmonious, but in reality, it is more harmonious. There's only concrete, there's only brick, there's humans. There's less diversity in a street, but it doesn't seem so homogenous. It doesn't seem so fluid. When you're in a forest, there's way more going on, but it seems like I'm looking at one beautiful picture. And that's because everything interacts beautifully and everything flows together amazingly. Why? The answer is because it all has the same source. When we do an animation, we're working with 5 different artists, right? And they need to come together and make a beautiful picture and make a beautiful animation. How are you going to get an artist? Each one works on their own, their own ideas and their own likes of colors and patterns and textures. How are you going to get them all to work together and make one cohesive picture? So you give them a palette. You give them, I think it's called a key, a color key. Now that everybody has the palette and they all know which pictures and what colors to use and what textures we could use, now we can make, and you could be your own artist and you could be your own artist, but if we're all using the same palette, we'll make the same picture. So by God, He's using the same core principles, the same core code, the same letters are going into everything. So everything, no matter how diverse, no matter how out there, it all has the same essential building blocks, so it's all the same picture. That's why when you go out in nature, we're all one, because we come from the same place. We come from the same energy, and that's incredible. And you could see it, we spoke about it in last video as well, about the DNA, how the DNA is in everything from myself to a blue whale to a bacteria and even viruses. And this DNA is all so similar, one person to another. It's all the exact same building blocks. So that's why it all flows together. And DNA is a mushal to the energy of the Aleph Beis. The Aleph Beis goes into you, me, Mike, everything, boom. And that's all powered by God. Now, just in case you're watching episode 4 and you're wondering what was the exact question that we started with and what did we end with? Because it sounds sort of similar. It sounds like we said at the beginning, why do I feel like an independent being? And we answered, because you cannot see your source. At the end, we ask, so 1 second. So God's energy is here, present. So how am I an independent being? So it sounds like we're asking the same question again. How am I an independent being? But there's a difference here that what we're saying is at the beginning is, why do you feel? It's all about my perception and my feeling. How come I feel independent? And we answered, because you can't see your source, right? And if you could see it mentally, we were discussing about that meditation, you would disappear. You wouldn't be. At the end, he's asking a more powerful question. If we are like the ray that's in the sun, forget why do I feel because I can't see, maybe I could perceive. How is it even possible for you to exist? Imagine like you right now inside the sun. How that doesn't compute. If a ray leaves and it's outside of the sun, fine. That I could deal with. It's dependent, fine, but it could be. But how could you be when you're inside the source? And that's what we did in this episode. We're showing that you are in it right now. You're the ray that is in the sun. You're at the source. So how are you here? And it's a much more powerful question. Not just why do I feel independent? How is it possible for independence to be a fact? And that's just wild, crazy stuff. So that is episode 4. And it's big. And that's why we ended with, you got to hear it a couple of times to let it chew on it and hear the podcast. And hopefully this brings some clarity. And we hope you enjoy the journey. Always, we're here to enjoy the journey of spirituality and connecting with Hashem. So good luck on the journey. Thank you very much. We'll see you at the next episodes.